Hello everybody. So today I am going to just run over like a little introduction to my orchids, because I feel like my orchids are an underloved part of my clan. I've had many orchids over the last few years. I've had quite a lot of Phalaenopsis orchids, which, touch wood, I think I've only thrown away one, and that one was a sort of a rescue from a garden centre where they were selling it for like £1 because it was at death's door. I can't even remember if I have thrown away a Phalaenopsis. I have. I don't know. I can't say for sure. I'm going to go with yes, I probably have, because I probably have, if I'm being realistic. This is me we're talking about. But I have most of my Phalaenopsis orchids, and actually, I don't know why, but they hold quite a sentimental feeling for me. I can pinpoint exactly where each one came from. So yeah, I'm a big fan of those, and they're just a lovely plant. I do have one slipper orchid, a Paphiopedilum, which is a ground dwelling orchid. So the Phalaenopsis are epiphytes. My brain wanted to say something else. They are epiphytes, so they grow up on trees, and they cling to things, so they don't grow in the ground, which forms quite an important part of orchid care. I've got a Paphiopedilum, which I've still yet to kind of master its care, honestly. I've got some dual orchids which just seem to succumb to aphids all the time. I can't seem to protect them from aphids, and I'm starting to think that maybe dual orchids and I are not meant to get along, which is really sad because I love them. But they are expensive, so but dual orchids are also a terrestrial or ground dwelling orchid, so maybe that's a theme, I don't know. I have had a Nellie Isla, which is a very beautiful orchid that smells gorgeous, but unlike the Phalaenopsis, does not like neglect. And I neglected it, I suppose probably because I was just treating it like a Phalaenopsis orchid, and it kind of croaked and died, so that's a shame. I would like to get preferably a Nellie Isla, because it smells so beautiful and the flowers are gorgeous, but I don't want to do that until I know I've got the patience and time to dedicate to that particular orchid. So that's kind of my orchid history. I don't think I've had any other orchids, but I do really rather like, that sounded very posh, didn't it? I do really rather like to go orchid spotting. So we did some very basic level orchid spotting in Scotland on holiday this year. I will see if I can dig out some pictures. If I can, I will pop them there. And that was amazing, and I can totally see why people get so into orchids. I can totally understand it. I think for me, because my interests span all of plants, I think that's why my orchids struggle, is because they some of them are needy. The Phalaenopsis, I think that's why I've managed to make them survive, is because they actually seem to do quite well on neglect. So but they are stunning. And one of my favourite things to do is go to the Kew Orchid Festival. My mum and I are planning to go this year. We're very excited about it. If you don't know what the Kew Orchid Festival is, I've got a video of it, and I took some footage of it last year, so I will pop that in the description, and I'll pop that up there so that you can click through and just have a look at the kinds of things that they put on display. It is a sight to behold. It is incredible, and I highly recommend it to absolutely anyone who has an interest in plants. It doesn't have to be that you have an interest in orchids. Honestly, even if you just like flowers, it's something unreal. So yeah, highly recommend going to that if you can. So that is kind of my little history with my orchids. My mum and I also went round a behind the scenes tour at Kew, and they have some little sort of hints and tips about how to look after orchids there. That's something that they seem to like to put on as part of the behind the scenes tour, and they have some gorgeous and incredible orchids. So yeah, I mean, if you can't tell already, Kew is where it's at. So I will show you my orchids. I filmed the orchid part, the showing you my orchids part, in the daytime because I'm a little bit short on time these days, but I figured if I can just get in 5 minutes at lunch in the daytime, then you can see my orchids as they are. None of them are in flower, but they are growing flower spikes, which I'm very happy about. So I will cut to that and I'll get back to you in a moment. Well, I guess you will see me anyway. Never mind. So here is our kitchen. So it's going to be a bit overexposed because I'm literally just showing you into the window. But here is where my orchids exist. So I've got a Paphiopedilum down there, which is a ground dwelling orchid. That's not why it's down there, but it's just where it ended up. And then I have my Phalaenopsis orchids up here, and that little one in the middle is a chili plant. So the reason I have them here is because this is a north-facing window, so they're not getting loads and loads of sun. They get a tiny little bit of sun in the morning in the summer kind of time, but they seem to really like it. It's quite a cold window in winter, and orchids do need a kind of a cold rest period over winter, and they seem to be doing really well. So that's why I've kind of left them there. But yeah, so I know you can't see very much at the moment, so I will get them down. So just to show you one by one. So here is one of my Phalaenopsis orchids. So I believe this one is a purple flower from memory. This is one that my mum bought me when I had my tonsils removed. And here he has a flower spike, so I'm very happy about that. So what I generally do when my flower spike dies off is I go down to the second node from the origin, and I cut just above the second node from the origin. So on this plant, when this flower spike dies, I will cut down to that second node. Don't ask me why. There's somebody who I came into contact with a few years ago who was a professional orchid grower, and he said that basically that was his trick to make an orchid reflower. So you can see that I've done it on this this spike, although that was the second time that I had cut him down. So this spike was obviously kind of like dead by this point. However, straight away he started growing a new flower spike, so I'm really happy about that. So I'm hoping that will flower soon. Don't mind the dishwasher beeping in the background. Then we have a very small little Phalaenopsis orchid. This one is a white Phalaenopsis orchid, I believe. He has been sort of clawed back from the brink of death, but he's now growing new leaves, which I'm very happy about, and some nice new roots in there as well. So these aerial roots are all doing well. And we have one very sad little Phalaenopsis, but he is on the mend, so hopefully you can see there is a new leaf in the middle there. I know that's not really focusing. Let's see if we can get that to focus. So this new leaf in the middle that has come along since I cut off these leaves. Basically he had a major infestation of mealybug, but he is still alive and still going strong, so fingers crossed he does good. And this little fella, I might have got this the wrong way around. So this is my other Phalaenopsis, and he also has another flower spike growing. And again, I chopped down the original flower spike to within 2 nodes, but I think he had decided that it was done, so he grew a new one straight away, which I am very happy about. And I think this one is a white Phalaenopsis with kind of purple spots. I don't know what their names are. In all honesty, I might have got this one and the other flowering one mixed up. I honestly can't remember which one's which. So we'll see. But you may have noticed that I've got all of these in slightly different mediums. So I've got this one in sphagnum moss, and I've got this one in a mixture of sphagnum moss and orchid bark. Sphagnum moss and orchid bark, and I think this is sphagnum moss on the top and orchid bark on the bottom. So that was kind of an experimentation thing from quite a while back. But yeah, they seem to be doing pretty well. When I water them, I literally will just water them from the tap with normal tap water, and literally just rinse it till it runs through, make sure I get all the roots wet so they start to go green, and then I will leave him to drain out so he's not sitting in water, and then once he is done I will stick him back up in the window, and I do that pretty much once a month, so they're very low maintenance. I also spray them with orchid mist probably once every 2 weeks or so. This is just like a fertilizing mist. And I pretty much treat my Paphiopedilum pedilum the same way. So he is a slipper orchid, a ground dwelling orchid. He's also in orchid bark. He's looking a little less happy. He has had a lot of mealybug, but I do treat him pretty much in exactly the same way. Let me see if I can focus this. Yeah, so yeah, that is my little orchid collection. That was my orchid collection. It is very small. I haven't included my dual orchids because they're just honestly not even worth looking at the moment. I've got one extremely etiolated, I can never remember the name. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. It was a very pretty dual orchid. Now it's etiolated. It's kind of crisp and it doesn't even look like anything worth looking at, so I'm not going to show it. But you know, if you struggle with dual orchids, you're not alone. I am also a dual orchid struggler. So yeah, that is my current orchid collection. They live in the kitchen in a north-facing window, as I said, and they seem to thrive on kind of a very neglectful regime. I water them once a month ish, basically just when I remember, and that's not often. I do know that orchids like a rest period over winter, where you still water them a little. They need to be a bit cold, because that is what encourages them to flower. Sorry, making a mess. So my orchid knowledge is limited, I'm not going to lie to you. So I just water them with tap water and I let it run through, and then I stick them back on the windowsill and they get their daylight-ish, but not strong sun, nothing like that. So they seem to be very happy, and like I said, I snip back the flower spikes down to the second node or just above the second node whenever the flowers die off, to try and promote more flower growth. I haven't actually, which is odd for me, I haven't really come across any orchid books until probably the last 2 or 3 months, where my lovely mum bought me 2 orchid books, and one of them I've been scratching my head for like the last 45 minutes trying to find it. I don't know where it's gone, but it is a very, very useful orchid book. And this is the other one. So this is the Orchid Expert by Dr. D.G. Hessayan. I can never say it. Dr. D.G. Hessayan. Why is that such a hard word name to say? So Dr. D.G. Hessayan also wrote the Houseplant Expert and the Houseplant Expert 2 and Plant Hunters and Container Gardening and the Gardening Expert and all sorts of things. I believe they wrote it. I don't know whether Dr. D.G. Hessayan is a male or female or other. So I'm just going to call them them. But here is a selection of their books. There's a lot of them, and for anyone in the UK, you'll probably be quite familiar. I'm not actually sure if these sell in other parts of the world, but I actually find these to be the most useful and accessible books, really, for plant care. So it's quite basic. This book was first published in, I think it was in the 80s. I will just double check. So I believe this book was first printed in 2008, but I'm not sure, honestly. But they have been writing books since sort of the 80s, 90s. So this one, the previous books that I've enjoyed looking at have been all kind of hand-drawn images, but this one has a lot of photographs as well. So this is a gorgeous dendrobium. So it's a very, very comprehensive book. It's got all sorts of species information. I mean, look at that orchid. It is just amazing. That is the Bulbophyllum lobii. So this is a really, really useful book because it just gives you kind of quite accessible and useful tips on how to look after your orchids. So it goes from the most basic, the Phalaenopsis, the moth orchid, the one that is produced through tissue culture all over the world and is very cheaply available, all the way through to some very rare orchids, which is very cool. And yeah, I really like this book. I've been running through it like the last couple of weeks because my mum kindly gave this to me for Christmas, and really enjoying it. In terms of my Phalaenopsis care, because I think this is the only orchid that I feel confident in growing because mine are doing well. This is my little miniature one, which I brought as a demonstration. So this is a miniature white Phalaenopsis orchid, and what I kind of wanted to point out, some key tips really, is that the for a Phalaenopsis orchid, the roots are actually photosynthesized, so that's why they are green. So it's quite important that you keep them in a transparent container. So this is why I keep mine in plastic pots. They are a little bit ugly, I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't say that this is aesthetically pleasing way to keep your Phalaenopsis orchids, but it is actually important for them to be able to photosynthesize and grow. The other thing is you want to make sure that it's got some really, really good drainage at the bottom. You do not want your roots sitting in wet medium. So I say that and it starts dripping. That's just so typical. So you can see on this orchid, on its roots, you can kind of see the history of this plant. So I don't know if you can see this too well because I have the exposure locked and the focus, but basically you can probably see that at around about this point here, there's a dent, and this is where I kind of forgot to look after my orchid, and you'll see it on quite a few of the tips of the roots, and on this one you can see he started growing some more of his root. This is since I've started caring for him a little bit more. Before I watered this plant today, the roots were kind of silvery, like almost blue tinged rather than green, and now they have a much more green and full appearance, and that is because we have watered it and it's absorbed moisture through the roots. So a healthy Phalaenopsis orchid root should look like this after watering. It should be thick, fat, and quite stiff. You don't want mushy roots or brown roots. If they're brown and dead, then that's not a problem. So you can probably see on this one, this is dead and crispy. I mean, it's attached to the plant, but there's no life coming through it, so it's not going to harm it to leave that on. But if it was mushy and kind of rotten, then I would get rid of that ASAP, because it's still connected to the plant and the rot can spread. So this one is fairly dried out, desiccated. It's just not being used anymore, but it's not rotted per se. But you do want to be careful, especially with the plants that you get from the supermarket or from your average garden centre. They often will come in little plugs, so you'll find that the plugs are sitting around the original root because these plants are grown in tissue culture. And for me personally, I find it really beneficial to remove those plugs, even if that costs some of the roots. Your Phalaenopsis may struggle for a little bit as it grows more roots, but ultimately it is worth it, because those plugs retain so much moisture around the roots. It can actually be very difficult to avoid root rot. So for me, what I found is, as soon as I get my Phalaenopsis orchid home, first thing I do is I remove all the medium, because half the time it's not even a good medium for a Phalaenopsis. It'll be like orchid bark, but nothing that retains any moisture, and you need some moisture for your orchids. Or it will be some kind of soil substrate, which is just going to make them rot, basically. So you want to get rid of the substrate, remove any plugs, and cut back any rotten roots. You only want to keep the green, fresh, thick, sturdy looking roots. And then you want to repot it. Make sure it's in a clear, transparent pot like this. I personally have found that a mixture of kind of 50-50 sphagnum moss and orchid bark seems to be very beneficial for my orchids. However, growing them just in sphagnum moss seems to be just as good, as long as I am still fertilizing. And then pretty much just water them once a month. They seem to thrive on that. So in terms of the fertilizing, I use this, which is Orchid Mist, Complete Care for Orchids. So it is a plant tonic. It contains nutrients. It doesn't really tell you what nutrients it contains, although I'm sure you could find it online. I think this is a bottle that my mum gave me several years ago when she first gave me my first orchid, which is this one. And I haven't yet got through the whole thing, but it does seem to work really, really well for my Phalaenopsis orchids. I don't know about other orchids, that remains to be seen, because I've yet to make one live. But for Phalaenopsis, yes, this is the one. And I do that whenever I remember. So it's not consistent. I probably do it once every 2 weeks to once a month, but it seems to take care of it. So this is usually about like £10 in the garden centre or less. So yeah, nothing crazy, but I am a big fan. I think that is mostly everything that I wanted to say about orchids. I would love to hear how you guys feel about orchids, because I feel like people are either plant people or orchid people, and there's not many people who are both. Although with the tropical orchids, like the terrestrial tropical orchids, and some of the rarer ones, I think that does pique the interest of a lot of planty people. So I think they are becoming a more generally popular plant rather than a niche popular plant. But obviously orchids have a huge, rich history in terms of collecting and hunting, and I just think they are a very cool plant. So yeah, that I will leave it there and say thank you very much for watching as always, and feel free to leave in the comments any suggestions for videos that you might like to see in the future, and just tell me about how you feel about orchids. I do understand that they're not for everyone, and they can be a bit boring when they're not doing their flowers, but I do find that they're very rewarding when they do eventually flower. So for me, it's a big yes. Let me know if you are going to the Kew Orchid Festival. If you are in the UK, it's well worth going to. But yes, I will leave it there, and thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Lucy? Here is some cat footage since I didn't put any in my last video. This is little Lucy having a snooze by the radiator. She is one sleepy little pussycat. There we go. Is that nice, girlie? Yes. Lucy. Lucy. She's a precious girl. Yes, yes you are, baby.